The techniques I'm going to be showing right now for Xstream will work in any application that supports Xstream. I'm going to be using Cinema 4D, but this technique can be applied to any other application. And the version of Xstream you're using doesn't really matter. 6 and up will basically work for this. Even version 5, you should be able to do this exact same technique if you have the normal map multipass available. So the first thing I want to do is load in, or actually, I do want to go to my preferences and just check my units, set them to centimeters, just to scale things down. I might end up changing them back. We'll have to see. So the first thing I want to do is open an Xstream, or open the scene we're working on earlier. And I'm going to start with the projection of the standard terrain, or we might have multiple terrains in the scene. We'll just go ahead and open it. Take a look at the view scene through camera 5, which is our projecting camera. And we can see we have that procedural terrain still in the scene, so it has not yet been converted. Now in this case, this proxy object is a little too low res if we wanted to continue building, adding ecosystems or other objects and have correct intersections. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can either improve the quality of the proxy, and there's a few ways of doing that. One is to edit the object, convert it over to that standard terrain, first increasing the resolution. And I'm going to bring that up to 1024 by 1024, just as I had done before. If you don't want to move through all the steps, if you are creating a huge change in pixel resolution and you want to calculate it, you can use the resize terrain option to just type in a value rather than continually hitting the ×2 button. So we'll convert this over to a standard and let that process. And the standard terrains usually give a much better proxy preview. So now we could either use this still somewhat low res terrain and just convert the proxy over to polygons, or we can use the method we were using before, which is the bake to polygon method. And I don't need a 2 million polygon terrain, so I am going to lower the resolution and bake it. And then what we need to do is export it. So what we can do is export the object. I'm going to do it as a C4D file. The terrain resolution, we can take a look at the estimated amount of polygons. Since it's already a polygonal object, it's not going to change. It's just going to export the full geometry. And I'm going to call this just terrain baked. And then you also want to make sure that you're selecting the file type within the save options in the window. Otherwise it will reset and by default set to a 3ds file. So no matter what the file format option you have set, when you click browse to choose your basically your directory, it will reset that. So now we can click OK. The only thing that's going to happen is we're probably going to end up with a little bit of a scale change, so we'll have to take a look at that. One thing I want to do is extract the camera that we currently have. So we're going to select camera 5, make sure that we're viewing through that camera, and then I'm going to add in a camera into the scene, and now we have a new one we can work with. If we take a look at the scene, I did have it a little bit offset, and it looks like the scale is maybe a little bit too large. So with the default settings, this scene ended up being really rather huge. So whether or not I want to set that back to meters, I could do that, or we could use the view options and change the grid size and some of the other units. But before I do that, I am going to just merge this scene with that new saved C4D terrain file. And we can see that the scale and position are different. We also have some extra geometry created here that we might need to remove. First of all, let's just take a look at the overall scale, and it definitely does need to be increased. So what I can do is take a look at the scale for this object, and it's normally units of 10. It looks like it might be a little off. So we might need to modify that a little more. The scales overall, once it's exported, are going to be a little bit different, so we might even need to bring that up to 8. One thing about the grid in view is that the grid spacing and basically the lines you'll see separating the grid is divided by 8 instead of 10. If we take a look at the position, what we can do is just copy the position of the proxy terrain and just paste it into the imported terrain. And it does look like maybe that scale is still a little off. Let's try 10 again. And actually 10 was correct. So it was just the perspective that was kind of throwing that off. And now they're matched up really well. I'm going to take a look at the terrain. And we can see it is a really low polygon amount. So if we did need to bake it to a little higher res, we could do that. Right now, it's almost the same as the proxy, even though the proxy won't give us the actual geometry because it might need to be edited. But what I can do is go ahead and just close out the view scene. So we have the terrain and the camera, and that's basically all we need from this scene. To refine the geometry, first what I want to do is create a camera that I can work with. I'm going to call this projection for this camera and create a new one so that we're not using the same camera to move around the scene. And I really probably should increase the resolution of the terrain, but for now this should definitely work. What I'm going to do is delete that grass material, and the terrain itself, I do want to check and make sure, and we're going to go over to the polygon mode, that the normals are facing the correct direction, and we can see that they are facing down. And we also have all that extra geometry on the bottom, which is normally something that would only happen during the terrain export. So really what should have been done, and I can show you that just really quick. In view, just before baking the terrain, I'm going to go ahead and just create a procedural. And when the zero edges mode is set to the way it is, where we have this edge, you'll want to set it to skin only before baking. And that way you're just going to get that top part of geometry and you're not going to have that uh, other geometry created and exported as part of the terrain. So that's one thing I should have done was just to make sure that was set to skin only. So before you convert it to a standard and bake it or export it, make sure that you have that setting turned on. It is fairly easy to edit this. I'm going to turn off only select visible elements and select all of these polygons. On the bottom and delete them because we don't need them. And then what I can also do is flip the normals. So we can reverse them and now see they're facing the correct direction. Another thing I like to do, just to be sure that we don't have any extra points, is to use a connect object. Move the terrain into the connect object, bake it to polygons, or make the object editable, which will connect everything together if there are any extra points. And then you can also run another option, which is to optimize and remove unused points. So we'll switch back to the object mode, and now we're just going to set up this material. So I'm going to set this up just like a normal material using the maps I generated earlier. I can load in an image for the color channel. And now we have that color map we generated. I'll also need to create probably a diffusion map, or I could use basically just going through that multipass and setting all that up. I might even set up a bump as well. For now, I'm just going to turn off the specular and then move over to normal. And one thing I could do is just load in one of the images for the diffusion. But right now, we'll just jump to the normal, and we're going to load in that normal map from the multipass. So from the original render, I'm going to be selecting the XY normal and saving it out, and also the XYZ normal, which we might end up using. The XYZ normal is needed if the polygon resolution is too low. So we have the XY normal, and then we'll just grab that XYZ, and you might even need the UVW coordinate as well, because that can be really helpful. So we'll go ahead and save these out, and then we can load in starting with the XY normal. So we'll go ahead, load the image, and I'm going to select the XY normal, keeping in mind that we might need to make modifications to the direction of the normal and the surface, whether or not we need to swap the X and the Y. I'm going to set this to the object mode and not tangent, because we're not going outward from the polygon surface. We're not using a UV map. Since we're using camera projection, you want to use the object mode, and that's really what's going to work best. We're going to go back to the projection and take a look. One thing I do want to do is set up, just so we can view this in the OpenGL, under Editor, I'm going to increase the texture size. Let's go ahead and do 2048 by 2048, so it'll show up a little better. And I'm going to move the material over onto the object, delete the other texture tag that's on there, and I can also remove the UVW tag and the polygon selection, and I'll keep the Fong on there for now. And under the tag for this object, and I am going to rename this terrain so it's not called polygon. Select the material, and under the projection select camera mapping and just drag the projection camera into the camera area, and also have to set up the size of the image, which is 3000 by 3000. Now we can see that the normal is facing the wrong direction. And we really don't have any lights in the scene at the moment. If we take a look at the default light, we can see where the light is coming from, and it looks like we do need to flip the red and then swap the Y and Z, so Y is up. And now we can see that showing. Go over to the object panel, switch to our other camera, and we can take a look at the scene. And you can, see, of course, see that stretching in the areas that are not showing up within the render. And what I want to do is add in a light. And I'm going to be using an infinite light, which is basically sunlight. We could also use the sunlight that is available in cinema, which is based on more real-world values. And a lot of other applications have that as well. Because of the scale of our scene, we are really far off. I'm going to go ahead and take our light, just kind of move it into place. And it looks like maybe I do need to modify the normal a little bit more. To get this to show up correctly. And you might just need to kind of move the light around to see what channels are going to need to be swapped. Because right now it's not working correctly with the light because the normal setup is a little bit different. So I'm going to go ahead and just find which values we need because I can't remember them just off the top of my head right now. And it does look like in this case, because of the original direction of the camera, not really having enough depth, I am going to need to use the XYZ normal. So we'll go ahead and load that in. And what I have set up, still the object mode. I'm flipping the Y, the Z, and then swapping the Y and the Z. So now we have a correct lighting setup. We can adjust the lights however we want. So sometimes the direction of the camera can impact how the normal is going to work in other applications. But for the most part, we now have something set up where we'll be able to change the lighting and really set it however we want. So it's kind of a non-destructive lighting render from view where we can set up different maps. And because we have the normal map, we're not going to lose any of the detail, except maybe along the edges because of the geometry. So one thing I want to do is just set up some lighting, or set up the shadow. I'm going to go ahead and just do shadow maps. I'm going to set it to 1500 by 1500 just to start with. And go ahead and I'm going to render the view. And we can see that showing up. So we'll be able to adjust this lighting however we want and not worry about having to re-render anything from view unless we need more detail in a specific area. And earlier I talked about how we can export the skies and render an HDRI image of the sky. Well, what we can then do is, depending on which application you're using, it's all set up differently. In Cinema, what we do is we add a sky object and then apply a material to it with the image map. I currently don't have that rendered out, so what I'm going to do is just create a temporary material that is just going to be no color, just luminance, and setting the color to a little more of a blue and making sure there's no specular value. And then we can just move that onto the sky. And you can really see the detail being generated from that normal map. This is probably one of the most effective ways to work with view terrains. And the overall material is just creating those maps. And for animation, this is just an outstanding way to very quickly generate an animation. And because the pivot of this object is a little off, I'm going to go ahead, move that around. And I might need to set up a construction plane or just move around the objects in the scene, since I could just take the camera and also grabbing the terrain itself, maybe linking them together whenever we want to move them. Just because I had that huge scale difference where I really should have kept it at meters instead of changing it to centimeters. And that's because I was working on a different scene. So now if we want to interact with this, we could use the elements available within Cinema. If I wanted to add an environment object, we could add a little bit of fog. And we'll go ahead and set this to meters. And it looks like that default won't really let me do that. It's going to keep our mode in centimeters. So we just need to increase it. So now we can add other elements in the scene. And we're basically working with just kind of a 3D composite here. And then we can build off of this and really create a more intricate scene. Of course, we are going to have these seams at the end of the image. So if you need to build on it more, you can set up the projection the same way as earlier. I do want to note that whichever camera is the active camera within view is the one that's going to show up in Xstream. So anytime you create a new projection, what you'll need to do is make sure you have a file saved with that camera as the active camera. And then doing as I had done before, where you view from the camera and then add in a new camera to match the values. Now, if the application you're using doesn't do that, where it will just create a new camera, you have to set the value, then keep the view scene open and just kind of copy and paste the coordinates over for the position. And if any focal length changes need to be applied. Because that's another thing, as the focal did end up switching over, The projection, we can see focal length 35, which is what I had it set to within view. So if that needs to be modified, you'll have to make that change as well. But you can really see the detail we're pulling out of this normal map. And like I was saying, it really is rather unfortunate that we can't use the normal map method within view, because it would certainly be a lot more powerful. But if you have access to another application where you can very easily load in these objects and set up the scene, it makes it a lot easier. Even in the OpenGL preview, we can pretty much tell just about everything we need to see. And I'm going to increase the fog distance a little. So now we can easily bring in any sort of object we want to use to interact with this scene, set up an animation, which is going to render extremely quickly. We don't have to worry about the normal view flickering, any of the material problems, and this ends up being probably the best way to work. You could always render out that HDRI and put it in the background. But what I'm going to do now is load in a scene that I've gone a bit beyond what we currently have. And we can take a look at an animation I'd set up. So here I have loaded in the scene. And I'm just going to go ahead really quick and just hide these cameras. Now, the resolution of these terrains is a little higher, and because I have a lot of image maps, you can see all of the materials I created for this. All of those are showing up pretty high quality in the OpenGL, so it is going to revert to a wireframe mode. And this is one of the earlier versions of the scene. I have built it up a little bit more, added some objects in, and I've done some composites with it. So just using this method, you can see all of the different cameras within the scene. And basically what I did was just that setup where I would go into view, reposition the camera, using those procedural terrains, render out the map, and then load in the scene into Cinema, grab that camera, and close view out. Because all I needed was that camera position, because I'm working on the same scene. And if we take a look at the render, what I have is GI is enabled, so we're using global illumination. We could set up other render quality passes if needed. I've also got an environment object, which may or may not be turned on at the moment. But we're going to be able to see really good quality overall. And if there was any area that I felt needed an increased amount of quality in the texture map, I would just go back into view and render out a new map for that area with a new camera projection. Now, you don't necessarily have to use camera projection. Some of the stuff you could go just from the top, pointing down. I really liked using the camera projection for this and just setting up alphas, because I felt I had a little more control, because terrains are obviously going to be moving and have scale going upward. So in order to get the sides to have the correct amount of resolution and detail, I needed to come in from the side, which is more difficult without having to set up UV maps, and camera projection really turned out to be by far the best solution. So we can see all the different maps in here. I'm going to go to the render settings. And just turn off global illumination for now. And I also have a vector motion blur turned on. I'm going to turn it off for the moment. Ooh, I do have save turned on. Hopefully I didn't overwrite any files, which I may have. We'll go ahead and just take a look here and render this out without any global illumination. Basically, overall, the OpenGL is giving us a fairly a good representation of what the scene looks like. And I did render out the animation very quickly. I do have that saved out as several images in a sequence where it's basically around 300 frames. And I also brought some other objects into the scene and then started to add atmospheric effects. So I'm going to go ahead and load in one of the next steps. Now in this scene, what I've done is rendered out the animation, modified the camera slightly, but what I've done is taken the sequence and mapped that to the terrain. So I've already rendered out the animation, and I'm projecting it onto the terrain. And then I started to work on the atmospherics. And rather than use a compositing application, I'm just doing it all directly within Cinema because it has so much power to it. And a lot of these effects are pretty easy to set up. And then really, I would take this into post, maybe using After Effects or Combustion to finalize it, and which is what I ended up doing with placing objects into the scene. But if we take a look at what we currently have, and we are going to see a repeat of the terrain along the bottom because that camera cuts off right there, and it is going to repeat itself. What I've done is taken the sky object and rendered out an image of clouds and started to intersect that with the terrain. And then I'm able to use some of those passes within post to refine it, and even just having a small shift in the rotation of the sky object over time, we can create a nice little bit of cloud animation. So I have a couple of different clouds set up, ones that are more in front and ones that are in back. And then the tiniest bit of rotation of that sky object will give the illusion that those clouds are moving and evolving. So the different layers where they're set up ends up working out really well. And we could just see them covering the mountains a little. And then we could use the techniques I was showing earlier with the Z-depth to be able to really be more precise about where it's cutting away. In this scene, I don't have a Z-depth set up for the cloud, but we would easily be able to create that from that original render. And I just want to show you that cloud that I'm using, 360 degree. Actually, I think in this case, it wasn't even a panoramic image. I just used kind of a larger area of cloud. And I just want to move away from the scene here. And I am going to turn off the environment object from the OpenGL and the render for now. We're going to see a lot of stretching because of the camera projection, and it's no longer the scene we were in before. I'm also using much higher resolution terrains in this case, but what we can see is that we have the animation camera right down here, and that moves through this area, and I've got some intersecting clouds where I set up materials. Let's go ahead and just take a look at that sky material. So here's the render I did of the clouds, where I just set up 2 cloud layers intersecting. I've got some rays kind of shining through, which I did end up kind of removing from the scene. This was set up with the original light I had used to render the animation, since I no longer have the material maps on the terrain. And all I really had to do was kind of swap the horizontal direction of the image in order to get it to map correctly on the sky, since we're viewing it from the inside. And here's a 8-bit version of this cloud layer. You can see a lot of grain, which isn't visible when we look at the HDR, at least not as visible. Something a little easier to work with. So this was the base layer. It's not a huge image, but definitely enough to throw into the background and just cover the area of the animation. Because once the animation is set up and you know exactly where you're going to be in the scene, it's a lot easier to bring in those atmospheric elements. So you're not rendering out stuff you don't need. There was no sense of me rendering out the entire sky when I'm only focusing on one specific area, and really didn't know what needed to be rendered until the animation was done. So it's a much better process that way, bringing in the atmospherics later, since they do take longer to render. But this was rendered in view separately, and then I brought it in and applied it to that sky object. And a little bit of a 64-bit version crash there, which always tends to happen closing Photoshop. But if we go back, and now we can see without the fog enabled, because I turned it off for the render. So now we can see where the clouds cut off, and of course the camera view area is below that. So overall, I do have fog really blending in with it to make it look a lot better, because it certainly did look better with the fog. So then there's one more version I just want to show you. And now what I've done is really break down the scene to just the area I needed. And the terrain itself is really just here as a matte object, and also to give a sense of where the object is. Basically this castle that I had created and loaded in. And in this case, this is actually set up. We're going to see if the textures are even on this castle. And it looks like they are not. This might have just been one of the passes I made for just the shadows. But working in this way, instead of rendering out the animation again of the objects in the sky, what I decided to do was just create a pass of just the castle, and then using the terrain as a matte object, using compositing tag to cut it out. And it looks like that GI is just going to take a minute, so I'm not going to worry about rendering it at the moment. So we just have this nice castle object, and now if we take a look at the animation, we can just start to see it coming in, and as the camera moves through, we move closer and closer to the castle. So when I rendered this out, just rendered the castle itself, and then the terrain. I have a compositing tag where I'm rendering it as a matte object, so that all we would see is just the castle, and then we can overlay the matte. I was able to create an alpha from that, and then I even created a separate pass for just the shadows of the castle, and then I cut it out with the terrain object. So if it's a good process to break everything down, no sense in rendering everything over again. I was able to use the color from the terrain to affect the GI by using the compositing tag, because it is seen by the GI. So that way it still affects the color render and also the radiosity, GI lighting, anything we have set up that way. And here I've just loaded in the scene that I actually used for that matte. What I did was take this terrain and the matte color I set to more of a green, or in this case it might not even be rendering, and I have a background object that I'm using to render that green. So if you take a look, just go ahead and render this out. So now we can just see the castle being affected by the lighting of the environment, but a separate pass that we can just overlay onto the rest of the animation and not having to render anything else out. And it went fairly quickly that way. I was also able to control the motion blur and anti-aliasing a little better because the anti-alias settings I have on the castle are completely different than those on the terrain, because a much higher amount was needed for this object. And granted, you could set up a compositing tag for that. So that's another way to, if you want to render it all together, you can do that as well. So now I've just done a quick merge of those two scenes. So if we were to have them in the same scene, we would see the castle showing correctly within the scene. It looks like I don't have the environment on right now with the fog. But overall, it gives you a pretty good idea of the kind of power you can use just by exporting a lot of the stuff out of Vue and using your main application in order to render things out much quicker.